The next speaker I'd like to introduce and welcome to the first virtual breakfast series is our own MSU climatologist, Dr. Jeff Andresen. Welcome, Jeff. We're all anxious to see and hear what you have to say about this wonderful Michigan weather that we've been having this spring. And yeah, go ahead and take it away. If you have slides, feel free to share them.
Well, thanks, Steve, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to 2025. And for some of you, we still have a ways to go before the growing season starts, but we do in other parts of the state. We've had some little bit of movement here. I'll talk about that in a second. And I am going to do some review here of look at the winter here just a little bit before we move into the forecast. But we are, in a nutshell, moving into a pretty active pattern with some changes are looking at some changes here over the next couple of weeks, I think that are noteworthy. And I get it's more towards the warmer and wetter direction than we've been here recently. But starting looking back at the winter temperatures, depending on where you were in Michigan, the winter here was actually fairly normal. On the right-hand side here, these are departures from normal for mean temperatures for December, January, and February, our traditional winter season. And the bottom line is essentially we were a little cooler than normal across the southern half of the state and a little milder than normal across the far north, at least in terms of temperature. And there was some variability here, but if we look at the extreme temperatures from this past winter, there were two big Arctic outbreaks, one in mid-January and then another one in mid-February that we had. But if we look at the temperatures experienced in those, actually a little bit milder than they typically are in most years. For much of the southern half of lower Michigan, the minimum, extreme minimum, these are air temperatures at 5 feet above the surface by standard. Most were in the -5 to -10 Fahrenheit range. That's that sort of light blue color. And as you move towards the lakes, milder temperatures. There were some parts of the state in the far west that did not go below 0 Fahrenheit the whole winter, which happens sometimes, but it's fairly mild. The contrast to that is the western Upper Peninsula, where there was deep snow cover, and this goes back to that outbreak in January. Temperatures there are extreme mins in excess of -25 or lower, minus 30 in some cases. So it really depended on where you were. That's that purple color up there. Soil temperatures, which I didn't have a graphic to show you here, but soil temperatures, because we had snow cover during both of these extreme Arctic outbreaks, were actually fairly mild. Many areas did not got down to near freezing or just a little bit below, but our 2-inch soil temperatures during the winter, and for most areas, remained milder than they typically are in a given year. I also would like to point out, and this follows on some of Christie's discussion here of what we've seen thus far, especially for overwintering perennials and overwintering crops. We have had, especially in the southern part of the state, some warmer weather here in the last couple weeks. And these are base 50-degree day totals as of yesterday. And in some cases, we've got almost 100 units thus far. And if you look at that relative to normal, that would put us, at least in the southern part of the state, that would put us several days to maybe a week or so. So many of you, I know you can see the greening of some of the crops, especially the wheat, has responded to this in those areas. As you go north of that, it's still been too cold, and the blues here are basically little or no base 50-degree accumulation. So most of any early seasonal development we've had has been in the south, and as I mentioned, it's a little bit ahead of normal for where we are typically for late March. Precipitation wise here and water wise, and we need to spend some time on this. This is an accumulated daily precipitation total. I'm using Owasso here in Shiawassee, representative of much of the state. But the green line is the observed total from the beginning of December last year up through recently here. The brown is the normal total. And what you can see here, at least for this part of the state, is that our precip totals dragged or lagged behind normal. It was drier than normal for much of the winter. It's been a little bit better than that recently, but we still do have deficits especially in central and some southern parts of lower Michigan. It's less as you go north. There's been a lot of precipitation there recently, but this is an issue for some parts of the state. If we look at the precipitation over cumulatively for the December, January, February period, and bring your attention here on the right-hand side, this is percent of normal. a lot of those yellows and reds are all drier than normal. The only exception to that for the winter here for our total precip was up in especially the central and eastern upper peninsula and the far northern lower, where we did have at least or even above wetter than normal conditions. And in terms of snowfall, another trend or pattern here that you can see that the totals are on the left-hand side for the season, and that's what they should look like, sort of climatologically, at least the pattern. But as you can see on the right-hand side, when they're expressed in percent of normal, less than normal snowfall for much of the lower peninsula and in the western upper peninsula, and then above normal for the eastern upper and far northern lower. That's the only part of the state that a lot of that goes back to really heavy snow, especially lake effect snow that we had back in December of last year. But most of the state saw below normal snowfall for this year. That flies in a little bit of contrast for what we had or what our forecast was. We thought we'd get normal to above normal, but for many areas we did not. You can see that's true for much of the upper Midwest as well. Ice cover here, given the temperatures that we've had recently, have generally been on the Great Lakes has been below normal. On the lower left-hand side here, that dark blue line, that's where we are right now. All of those other lines here that you see, those are historical accumulations of ice cover. The red is what's normal for the time of the year. And you can see it peaks typically in the end of February and early March across the Great Lakes and then begins its seasonal drop or decrease. That's where we are now. But we're still running right now probably about half of normal. That has, and why does that matter? Well, it influences how fast things might warm up typically in the spring season. And when we have lower than normal ice cover, that usually happens a little faster or than it does in other years when we have really heavy ice cover. Only one couple days or weeks here where you can see where we actually were above normal for the winter, even though temperatures were in many cases colder than normal. Currently, about 6% of the lakes now covered with ice. This is the latest U.S. drought monitor overview here for the U.S. And I think this is important to look at. At least it's a reference we need to start with at the beginning of the season, because as most of you remember, we had one of the mildest and driest falls last year on record. And we went in many parts of the state, we went to a fairly dry situation. And with below normal precipitation at many spots over the winter here, that has resulted in a significant fraction of Michigan and much of the upper Midwest in some type of an abnormally dry category. You can see that here, Michigan actually has some division D2, which is considered climatologically severe drought. Now, we have to use some common sense with that because of the time of the year. D2, a severe drought, certainly has very, very different ramifications or implications now than it would if it had occurred in the middle or the latter part of the growing season. And that's the most important thing. But the bottom line is here, at least relative to climate, you can see in these darker brown areas, portions of central lower Michigan and northern lower Michigan, we do have some quite a bit of D1 and D2. It is quote, or at least climatologically abnormally dry, but the key to this is that the winter's the driest climatologically part of the year, and we frequently see major and rapid changes in moisture availability as our seasonal precipitation picks up. And that's a good segue into where we're looking here in the outlook, because I think that's what we're going to see some of that take place here over the next few weeks. So while there's a lot of brown on here, that's not a good thing. It's certainly better now than it would be 8 weeks from now. But I think that we will see some changes in this given our outlook. And that's where I'm going to go next. And so on our weather map here this morning, we have actually a fairly nice day for most of the state. There will be some increasing clouds, but a little bit warmer temperatures today for many areas, ranging from the 50s in the south to the 30s in the north. There's a frontal boundary up here to our north you can see over Lake Superior that'll be moving to the state. That's not going to cause really any problems, but looking here at the next several days, we've got two big weather systems to deal with. The first one will be coming here late this week into Friday, into Saturday, and then a second one will come overnight Saturday, Sunday into Monday. And between those two, we're looking at a lot of moisture out of the Gulf, and some significant, probably the most significant precip we've had in Michigan here in several weeks. If I flip through to tomorrow morning, you can see the first weather system to our south and west beginning to be organized out of the Central Plains. There's a warm front with some showers that will move in here by again late tomorrow night into Friday, with again with the threat of showers, and then gradually spread north and east during the day. Here's Friday morning, and you can see things get closer now. A lot of colors on this particular graphic from the Weather Service, and this is one major message here is, especially for the northern part of the state, we do unfortunately here have, I think, a fairly high likelihood of seeing some adverse winter conditions. And not winter we would typically think of with heavy snow. There will be some snow with this, but the real threat with this next system, or the two systems really, is freezing or mixed precipitation, particularly freezing rain. And there is a possibility that this first system and the second system could have significant amounts of freezing rain, especially for the Upper Peninsula and the far northern lower. I think that's an area we really want to watch here because of the amount that's involved here. We could see heavy ice accumulations, and that's never, ever a good thing at any time of the year. But we're at that part of the season and transition into spring here with a little bit warmer air, and this is certainly a significant threat as we look at the next few days. Probably the biggest threat weather-wise we have in the short term. We will not see that in the south. We might see some mixed precipitation at times and still some snowfall, but the real threat of any real problems or impactful weather is going to be in the northern part of the state. Here's Saturday morning. The first weather system you can see is moving through. There's a frontal boundary here, and that frontal boundary is going to sit there for a couple days, all the way into early next week, while the second weather system I mentioned here starts to get organized. That will come again during the day on Sunday and then into Monday. But again, those colors there indicate mixed or freezing precipitation. The greens are liquid precip. So for most of the southern half, or even maybe two-thirds of the state, we should see mostly rain with these two systems. And then of course, the exception is in the far north, where we would have a real strong threat of freezing rain, some sleet. There will be some snow in it as well, but probably mostly freezing precipitation. Now, with that in mind, here's a graphic. This indicates the accumulation, or the likelihood of accumulation, of at least a tenth of an inch of freezing rain or glaze or ice on. And I think this fairly well illustrates the area that's really at risk here. You can see much of upper Michigan and portions of northern lower Michigan have that tan color. Very, very high likelihood of seeing significant ice accumulations. And again, that nobody wins with freezing rain. The big problem, the biggest issue with freezing rain, obviously, besides of getting around vehicles and so forth, but it's weight on power lines and trees and so forth. And we typically see lots of problems with power outages with freezing rain. So that's something to really keep an eye on here as we move into the weekend. Winter storm watches have been issued by the National Weather Service here for the weekend. That's the primary reason why. Now, on a bigger picture here, if we look at how much precipitation is expected over the next week, lots of purple here. This is the wettest map that we've seen with our forecasts in some time. It's a big change. And I mentioned again, we have dryness, at least climatological dryness in many areas of the state right now, but this is going to make a difference. We see in most parts of Michigan and most of the Ohio Valley and the Eastern Corn Belt, 1 to 2 inches of water equivalent here over the next week. And again, this is all as a result of both these next two weather systems, the first one again at the end of the week, and then the second one at the late part of the weekend. And depending on where you are, most of the precip in the far north will be with the system one, whereas in the southern part of the state, most of the precipitation will be with system two late in the weekend. But this is fairly big news, and it would change certainly the outlook here for precipitation, or for soil moisture, and for looking at again dryness. 1 to 2 inches would make a big difference. The average precipitation for the whole month of April, of course, is only on the order of 2.5 to 3 inches. So you look at this. It's a pretty significant event. We are moving into a more active weather pattern. We're also moving into a pattern of warmer temperatures, at least temporarily. This is both the 6 to 10 and the 8 to 14 day outlooks for and that should not be March. That should be April. We're a month behind at the top of that. Apologize for that. But what is important here, if we look at the jet stream flow pattern for early April, you can see troughing out over the western part of North America, ridging over the east. That puts Michigan under southwesterly flow. It should result in a significant moderation or warming of temperatures. And that is reflected. Our temperature outlook, both for the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day timeframes, are towards warmer than normal. The other big, I think, message or theme here is that we're looking at above normal precipitation once again. And again, after a drier than normal winter, a lot of areas, I think this is fairly significant. Of course, in the short term, that means challenges in terms of work and what can we do when there's going to be certainly some delays and it's going to take a while, but we are adding water back into the system. A lot of it that should help us for later on and improve this dryness situation. But it also means that we're probably not looking at any really big windows of opportunity for field work anytime, at least in the short term. Now, in the longer term, in the Pacific, we've had a La Nina event, a weak one, actually very limited, a very weak event out there. That has come to an end really, and we're moving back now towards neutral conditions. These are current or recent. The blues are cooler than normal on the right-hand side here. The browns are warmer than normal, and that cooler water that was with La Nina earlier is basically almost gone. And all of our outlooks here collectively suggest that we are moving towards an El Nino Southern Oscillation Index. That's what's used here for the forecasting, towards neutrality. And moving from La Nina to neutrality, that's on the right-hand side here. That's where we're going to be for the rest of the spring and into the upcoming growing season. So there really isn't a strong direction, at least in terms of what's happening in the Pacific, or influence on our outlook. Some years we can, but it's typically when we have a stronger La Nina event, and this was definitely not a strong event. So right now, as far as the Pacific, there's still some influence of La Nina in our outlook, and some of that is above or wetter than normal conditions here for the late winter, early spring. That's in the forecast, but beyond that, not much influence expected from the Pacific. These are our most recent or brand new long lead outlooks on the top here for the month of April, and for the mean temperatures, no forecast direction for Michigan for the month of April, but as you can see on the upper right, wetter than normal conditions expected. And I think that's a reflection of what you just saw with the medium range forecast guidance. The 3 month April through June outlook does shift us towards warmer than normal or milder than normal temperatures, and also continues the wetter than normal, at least for the early part of the growing season. And interestingly, moving on, we typically don't look at this one, but it is interesting to note, if we do move further, the Climate Prediction Center does go all the way out a year in advance. Their skill here is limited, but it's still interesting, I think, still to look at this. They do suggest milder than normal conditions, warmer than normal growing season coming up here. But more importantly, I think they also have the possibility of drier than normal conditions, at least for the latter part of the upcoming growing season. So we may be looking right now, collectively, this says we start wetter than normal and then possibly move to drier than normal as the season in 2025 unfolds and moves ahead. So that's the latest that we have here at least in the weather outlook. Big change. So some transition and some changes here are expected, certainly within the next few days and in the next couple of weeks.